Welcome back. This time I am again with Matt Klink, and this time, as promised in the previous video, we are going to discuss about policy, the Ukraine policy, of the Trump administration and also the Biden administration, of which I have been very, very critical. So, to begin this conversation, on what side are you on the issue of Ukraine? Because I see Republicans who are for decisive, a strong response, and they were pretty much the ones who pushed Biden at first, when Biden was still dithering and hesitating, and those who want to uh, drop Ukraine into the Russian sphere as if it were a trophy. So, in which camp? Both are Republicans. In which camp are you?
Well, I don't know if I fall in clearly into either camp. I think the biggest challenge with Ukraine is the foolishness of saying that Ukraine is going to win. Ukraine's never going to win. They don't have the people to ever defeat Russia. Um, and that becomes an issue. I know, look, I think that the to cut to the chase, I think that we need to give Ukraine just enough weapons to maintain a stalemate. And then hopefully that encourages Putin to come to the negotiating table at some point. But the idea of flooding Ukraine with hundreds of billions of dollars and thinking that they're going to push Russia back from not only gains that they made in 2022 under Joe Biden, but in 2014 under Barack Obama in the Crimea, it's foolish. It's never going to happen.
Well,
So,
there are from American generals like Ben Hodges to reputed scholars like Jack Watling from the Royal United Service Institute, that in 2023 in 2023, they believe Ukraine could have expelled the Russians had not been because of Biden's gradualism. And yes, the difference in populations are huge, but the problem with for Putin is that, and that's the reason why he has not still is order a mandatory draft, is that he doesn't want to clash with the public opinion in the cities from where he's vulnerable. He's practically sending the criminals and the poor from Russia to fight the Ukrainians. Besides, if you let Ukraine fall apart, the all the effort Frederick Merz is doing to overhaul the European defense system will fall apart, because they will lose 1 million army strong Ukrainians, considering that the Europeans are very reluctant to send troops to anywhere, and two, a lab experiment where they could test what works and what doesn't. And those 800 billion euros they have pledged will go to waste, as in many other funds approved by the European Union.
well, two different tracks there. One,
Yeah.
I mean, look, whether people are speculating what Putin is going to do and what he's not going to do. The only one who knows what Russia is going to do is Vladimir Putin. And right now, he is reclaiming territory slowly. The Ukrainians are not capable, from a traditional military perspective, of holding ground. And were it not for largely American weaponry, they would have lost a lot more ground. The problem is that we're now 3 years into this fight. And then look, in terms of Germany, what Frederick Merz says he's trying to do with Germany, you know, I just frankly, the Germans post World War II are they're a meek country militarily. They have no desire to engage, and I find it, the arguments that Ukraine is the linchpin, that if Ukraine falls, then Poland will be next, hogwash, because
Um,
because
no,
Putin
okay.
knows that if he goes into the Baltics or if he goes into Poland, now we do have war because it's an Article 5 NATO commitment. So the best thing that can happen is a negotiated peace. And I think that Donald Trump right now is frustrated. He said as much yesterday. Um, if Germany were serious about, wanting this war to come to an end, they would stop purchasing Russian natural gas, as would the rest of Europe.
Well, on the first point, I'm not talking about what Putin wants to do. I'm talking about what Putin can do. And he has several constraints. One is the economy that is slowing down despite all the money he has poured on defense. And second is demography. In that case, you have that the cities would probably turn against Putin if he stole a mandatory draft. So he is moving, even though he has 3 times the population of Ukraine, he is walking a very thin line. Second, on the second point, is that it's true that the Olaf Scholz appeasement was as shameful as Biden's appeasement because he sent weapons, but just he sent them just enough to survive, not enough to win.
But they'll
And
never win. They can't win.
Frederick Merz, but Frederick Merz has turned even Pistorius. You see Pistorius inside Olaf Scholz party siding with Merz against precisely that meek attitude you mentioned. So that's something that has to
But
be welcome.
but
Now,
it
with respect to the issue of winning, we have two issues. Is what happens if Putin wins? If Putin wins, he's going to weigh heavily. He's going to become a senior partner in the yuan zone, and he's going to weigh heavily in our relations with China, which is terrible if you consider how Putin conceives a foreign policy and trade, the Sahel, now Afghanistan, Syria. So he's conceived areas of influence in terms of the 19th century as a privateer. So this is that is a terrible scenario, especially if you consider that the second and third army are Russia and China respectively, and they are very complementary. They complement each other because Russia has many more seasoned soldiers, but China has financial backs. Imagine a war with both of them together. That would be a nightmare.
Well, to address that, I just read an interesting article that talked about there is a significant amount of conflict between Russia and China, largely from the time when Russia was stronger and China was weaker, uh, in Manchuria and places like that. And I mean, just because Russia and China may agree on what's happening in Ukraine doesn't mean that Russia and China are in cahoots around the world. That there is significant points of conflict and contact between the two militaries. And right now, the Chinese military is significantly stronger than the Russian military, particularly in the east. So, I mean, again, you're assuming that, look, I don't. This is not a zero sum game. It's not a Putin wins all or Ukraine wins. I mean, because one, as I've said, Ukraine's never going to win. They physically can't do it. And two, they're never going to expel Russia from the territory that Russia has already taken, unless there's something fundamental that changes, meaning other troops on the ground. So, I mean, look, I think that the reality is the solution here is going to be a negotiated peace. I think that what you're seeing the Republicans in the Senate do now that they've resisted doing because they didn't want to shove it in the face of Donald Trump. But now that Trump has realized that, in his words, Putin has been bullshitting him, I think you're going to see much tougher sanctions from the US. But again, I go back to what I said earlier. If if Europe were serious about ending this war, they would stop buying oil and natural gas from Russia, and they're not.
They have reduced. It's true, and I have read at least two articles to saying that about talking about Europe's hypocrisy when it comes to the Russian gas. They have stopped Nord Stream, but they have increased LNG imports. So they are still, we have still that problem. But the issue is that you cannot trust you cannot trust Putin. If you accept Putin's conditions, Zelensky is going to be immensely unpopular. He's going to destabilize Ukraine as he destabilized Georgia.
We don't
And
know.
let me finish.
I'm sorry, please.
And he's going to turn Ukraine into Belarus. That will be the final stroke to NATO's credibility.
Yeah. Well, again, we don't know how popular Zelensky is in Ukraine because he's canceled elections and has ratcheted down control on
Mm.
the media. So
The Ukrainian law establishes clearly, and the opposition has backed the position that while the war lasts, there should be no elections.
he is Ukrainian law. So don't. I mean, look, having been
The
to
opposition themselves have backed that position.
having been to Ukraine four times and spoken in
Mhm,
Kyiv on four separate occasions,
mhm.
you know, Vladimir Zelensky is no great champion of democracy. He's just least corrupt than the other past rulers of Ukraine. So, I mean, don't hold it. He ain't Winston Churchill. He's not. And I think that that's the mistake. Um, and I think that the Democrats fell in love with him. This guy is a poser. And yeah, 3 years ago, he may have met the moment, but at this point, browbeating countries to giving Ukraine more, frankly, it's not a
Um,
viable or tenable solution.
and yet, when Biden offered him a ride, his answer was, "I need ammunition, not a ride." And yet, the levels of corruption in the military have decreased because, before Putin, excuse me, before Zelensky, Ukraine was not less corrupt than Belarus. Russia, Belarus, Ukraine has similar groups of oligarchs, and yet those groups have been sidelined a bit by
A
Zelensky.
bit. It's
I mean,
gonna
the best you can do in these circumstances. What happens next, and he has been advocating for a fast track to the European Union, which has standards on corruption, which would be
that will never
against
happen.
the European Union, not NATO.
Never.
European.
They
Well,
don't
that, but
they
that
don't even they're not even close to meeting the minimal criteria of the European Union. They have no business being in the European Union, nor do they have any business being in NATO.
well, it's Zelensky has been pushing for admission in the European Union,
Oh, I know.
which is against corruption. He may not be in the position to change that issue 180 degrees, but given the circumstances, I believe, and on other issues, because I am FDR liberal, mayors Zelensky are going to be in different tracks than me, but I have to acknowledge that they are leaders that are unfortunately have come too late to the challenge because we wasted 2 years with Olaf Scholz and Joe Biden. Now, the matter is you brought the issue of how we or that Ukraine can win. My point is how do you conceive peace? Because signing another Minsk accord with Putin is nothing because he has violated Budapest, Minsk one, Minsk two, so it would be just a farce. How do you conceive peace?
Yeah, and again, I don't have an answer to that, but I can tell you this, that the prospect of American taxpayers opening their wallet and funding a war that is a stalemate for the next 3 or 4 years is not an appealing prospect either. So, again, I agree with you that you can't trust the paper that it's written on. And that's why I think that what Trump had said earlier is Europe needs to step up.
Hmm.
If Europe wants to do, I mean, which would be, you know, recent history, meaning within the last 30 years, that would be antithetical to everything that they've done, whether it's the UK or the French or even the Germans. But Europe needs to take a leading role here. And I mean, we can say all we want about, whether or not Ukraine should be in the EU. Ultimately, that's for 29 member states to decide. I can pretty much guarantee you that I don't think that Poland or Hungary would want Ukraine in the European Union. Um,
No,
you know,
Poland,
and
yes. Slovakia and Hungary, not, because they are close allies of Putin. But Poland, yes, because Donald Tusk survived his confidence vote. Now, but the point, I have to give credit where credit is due. Trump pushed Europe to take defense more seriously. Now, the way you take defense more seriously is consolidating the fragmented, chaotic European defense industry. And that's where precisely there is no progress. And Trump has not pushed for anything of that kind. Trump in The Hague is push more for increasing the defense budget to 5% in conditions that cannot be processed overnight. So he went to sell American weapons. So he saw 800 billion euros. He saw the opportunity to sell American weapons, not to sell the overhaul of which would have the overhaul of the defense industry, which would have required clear guidelines on which to base long-term contracts. What Germany is trying to do on its own. So, is if you live now, how can we conceive peace? Peace, unfortunately, requires two conditions, at least one. One is that Europe's defense can be overhauled to precisely take the heaviest part of Ukraine's defense on its shoulders and not on American shoulders. Granted. But precisely for that, we need to overhaul the defense industry, especially if we consider that the million army strong and the lab test that has allowed to, for instance, make huge of improvements about the role of drones. And the second condition is consider that Putin's lifeline is China. Because if China cuts its trade with Russia, the war would have ended in a matter of weeks, no matter how many people Russia has. So, and Russia has to be involved. Macron saw that, and yet Tyler, on the second end, I am less and less hopeful because China has been hardening their position because when it was time, it was not convoked, and now it's more and more openly helping the Russian military. So, what do you think about these two conditions?
Well, let's take the second one first because that's the
Hmm.
one that you most recently spoke about.
Hmm.
Look, I think that my understanding of Xi Jinping and China is, right now they're getting discounted Russian gas, which is what their
Hmm.
economy needs. They have a robust defense industry, and they're supplying Russia with weapons, so they're getting, they're it's a good trade for them to supply Russia. And I don't, unless and until there is a compelling reason for China to abandon Russia, I don't see them doing that right now. Frankly, the same with the Iranians. And the,
Let me just bring. I know I have talked too much.
oh, please, please
Let
go
me.
ahead.
I would mention two reasons there. Is one is the deflation in China's economy, and that so they need desperately to solve that problem. They need the West more than they need Russia, and the second issue is that Xi Jinping has resented very much Putin's attempt to become the senior partner in the Yuan Song and bypass them on his appeals to North Korea, which has sent a lot of help to. But so they have bypassed Xi Jinping.
The the challenge, though, again, this goes back to timidity among our European allies, is they have not conditioned whatever it is, increased trade or more cultural exchanges, whatever, with China based on their support or their level of support or intensity of support for Putin. So, I mean, look, I think as you just acknowledged, and what I had said earlier is that uh, just because China is supporting Russia in Ukraine doesn't mean that their alliance is across the board and on everything. There is a conflict from a personality standpoint between Putin and Xi, and also, as I mentioned, there is that potential for military conflict and China wanting back much of the territory that it lost in the 1900s and primarily in the late 1800s and 1900s when China was at its weak point, and Russia was, not strong, but certainly stronger than China was. And then I believe what was your first point that you made about?
That if you let Ukraine fall, you pretty much the overhaul of the European defense industry falls apart because Europe is very reluctant to commit soldiers. They are afraid of having their soldiers killed. Second, because Ukraine is the lab test that, in terms of innovation, has allowed to make lots of progress, for instance, in drone warfare, in electronic warfare, and that would be lost. And those 800 billion euros they have committed would be lost, wasted, as it has happened for instance, in the New Generation Fund and other European initiatives. They need, otherwise, those 800 billion euros are going to be dedicated only to buy American weapons, and that will not allow them to overhaul the system and stand up precisely to stop Putin, to deter Putin, because Putin is going to keep trying to destabilize Ukraine if the war stops, unless they realize that Europe is strong enough to counterattack. That's not going to happen if as today, Putin is producing about 3 times the number of artillery shells that Europe has, even though Europe has 10 times the GDP.
Well, but that's more to the Europeans grossly underfunding defense and relying upon the
Mhm,
United States of America since World War II. And I mean, look, the idea, I mean, two observations from that.
mhm.
One is the idea of Europe, suddenly getting, suddenly becoming more muscular militarily in the near term is, I think, right now it's simply rhetoric. Um, and I think that they have. I mean, there's a reason why they can afford barely these social welfare economies that persist across the board in Europe, because again, they rely primarily on America's military umbrella. But I think second and more importantly is I just frankly don't believe that Europe is ever going to take this seriously, and it would require American funding for at least another decade until Europe gets its act together, if they ever do. And I just, I mean, first of all, I don't, the prospect of spending hard-earned tax dollars in Ukraine more than what we've already spent and largely wasted is just a non-starter. I would rather spend it domestically on American citizens and on American priorities.
I sustain that Putin destabilizing Ukraine would end up costing much more in terms of our relations with China. So that's why and regardless of where the border ends up in the end, the matter is we need to put Europe on track to counter counter Russia, and that is not happening. But you say subsidizing Europe's defense is not is a non-starter. Well, it's not
Well, no,
unless
subsidizing Ukraine's defense for the next decade is a
it's
non-starter.
it's part of Europe's defense, but
It's not.
but
It's
well,
not.
yeah, let's say Ukraine's defense. Well, if Europe doesn't overhaul, doesn't take serious steps to overhaul its defense industry, and for that they require clear guidelines and to get start long-term contracts, and that process may take a decade. Yes, but you can't if you unless you see that process moving on. Yes, I believe that the cause is hopeless. But then, if the process starts, it would be very myopic to 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 abandon Ukraine, considering all Ukraine could mean in terms of defense for NATO, because and
I mean, the only defense that Ukraine provides to NATO right now is that it's a buffer zone between Russia and NATO aligned countries. That's
well,
it. And that's been Ukraine's problem historically for centuries is they are located in a horrible place between larger, more powerful neighbors.
well,
So
no, don't forget, for instance, the initiatives of Russia in Afghanistan, in Syria, in and in other places where in the Sahel, not just in the Sahel, it has expanded much more than that with the African Corps. And in those cases, forget about if they have rare earths or minerals needed for magnets. Forget that you are going to be able to compete on market conditions with with the strongmen the Russia has pushed has supported in those areas. So you see this while China, despite all I have criticized on China, at least their the diplomacy is based on road and belts. In the case of Russia, is based on a 19th century vision of areas of influence.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, you've just expanded the horizon. Russia is strategically weaker in Syria right now than they've
Mhm.
been in a long time.
Because of
They're
Ukraine. Ukraine.
no, because they're well, if you want to say they're stretched, but I think also the fact that Bashar al-Assad is gone, and whether you're saying okay that happened because Russia was tied down in
Mhm.
Ukraine, okay, I'll give you that. That's legitimate.
And
But
Iran,
but
remember that Iran was hopeful that Russia was going to come in his
well, and so
help.
was, and they were hopeful that China was as well, and
Yeah.
neither did because
Mhm.
they realized that it wasn't in their strategic best interest. But
Wh-
look, and in terms of Africa, Africa was largely Wagner Group. And
mhm.
the Wagner Group, with the surprising plane crash was at Prigozhin.
Mhm.
That they have been radically weakened, and China, as you said, China is much more of a threat across the African continent than is Russia at this point through Belt and Road, but also then when these countries who have leveraged their future with China can't pay up. China says, "Oh, we'll trade you for a permanent port," which is what I think they have one now in Djibouti. Um, so, I mean, look, the overall, I mean, look, this is global politics on a grand scale, and it is now a multipolar world. It's now no longer just the U.S. versus China. So the idea that if we don't defend Ukraine to our last dying breath, that Russia benefits somewhere else, I just am simply not buying it. Ukraine shares a border with Russia. They have been at each other's throats for centuries.
For
And
centuries, and
and
yet,
even if we have peace, even if we get a peace treaty, Russia is always going to tinker in Ukraine. And so, I mean, look, then if Europe wants to tinker back, then let Europe tinker back. But the American checkbook should not have to remain open for the next decade while I say while they figure it out. I think the more appropriate one is if they figure it out.
well, on that I disagree because of the long-term cost of losing Ukraine. Because this is not a matter of territorial gains. Putin wants to show that through Ukraine that he deserves to be Xi Jinping senior partner, and then he's going to explore that model. And with respect to NATO nations, no, he's not going to engage in war with NATO nations. He's just going to destabilize them with their hybrid war program. Where they are going to send their troops is to other places where America has interests, to support allies like Iran, like look what is happening right now in Afghanistan. When the Taliban fell, China has interest in China's lithium, but yet for security concerns, they have abstained for the moment. Now Russia is opening the ground. They are willing to fight ISIS-K and to provide that security for China to explore the lithium while they build a pipeline for their oil. That's the model they want to explore, and that's going to cost us in the long term much more when we have to fight for resources that are located in difficult regions like rare earth and others. But I know you have to do other things, so we have about 4 minutes, and I would like to give you the last word, and leave this for discussion to end it up for probably next week, if you
Yeah,
agree.
no, look, in my humble opinion, I think that the best course of action is to give Ukraine just enough to keep Russian soldiers dying at a rapid clip, to ensure that they don't make any more territorial gains than they already have, and ultimately then to ratchet up economic sanctions on Putin and those countries doing business with Putin to force him to the negotiating table. And then at that point, negotiate boundaries that allow Russia to keep the land that they've already taken. And then Europe needs to step up and have a whether you call it a security buffer or whatever, let Europe play the tripwire, but not America. America can be involved in Ukraine through rare earth minerals. Um, and that will provide American money going to them for a tangible product that benefits us. But the bottom line is Europe needs to play a much more active role. This is not
Mm.
Europe post World War II, and the ability and the desire for American taxpayers to open their tax book, their checkbook for an endless war is not only unfair to the Ukrainian men and women that are dying at significant numbers, but also unfair to American taxpayers. We have needs at home that we need to take care of. And frankly, we have more important global national defense priorities. So that's it.
So with that argument, I should also cut defense aid, and this is not even the case of sales to Ukraine, but the aid we are providing Netanyahu, right, to use those funds at fund, those funds
Oh,
at home.
Israel is very strategically important for us.
No, in my opinion, Ukraine is much, much more important for us. But let's leave that for the next, because we are just 2 minutes from, because you have to do other things. Probably next week, we could talk about
Two
finish
weeks. Two
two
weeks.
weeks.
I'm traveling next week.
Okay, 2 weeks and same time.
Yep, same time. Sounds
And
good.
we probably dedicate a couple of a few minutes to end this conversation, and we could talk then about would you like to talk about the role of government?
You tell me what you want to talk about, and I'll make sure that I'm prepared.
The role of government.
The role of what?
Government.
Government. Sure, love to.
So Dutch versus FDR's New Deal.
You got it. I'm in. Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye bye.
Bye.